All right. Our live Pastor Johnson down the road in Manila, if you're in Manning, or if you're Manila, I'm here. And glad to be back from my vacations and whatnot and kind of getting back in the groove of everything. And so we are continuing with our kind of our interview series on Mondays, and very excited because we have Lisa Clark all the way in from St. Louis, and we visited a handful of people from St. Louis. But Lisa, have you been in St. Louis all your life, or where have you been?
Actually, yes. I am a trained teacher. I married a pastor. So as church workers, I was planning to go who knows where. But after our schooling in Nebraska, and my husband studies in Concordia and St. Louis, then he was called just 45 minutes away into Illinois, and then he was called back into St. Louis. So we've really actually both been close to home most of the time, which is very unique. Yeah.
Sure. So Concordia, Seward?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so that's about 2.5-ish hours away from us. So it's a nice little jaunt, but definitely special to us. Thank you for being a part of with us this morning. You are working at Concordia Publishing House. It's been around for a while. Can you explain first off what is Concordia Publishing House?
Great question. Concordia Publishing House is the publishing arm of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We're not the same as, the Synod offices or things. We're different, but we were built right at the beginning to kind of serve the church. Not all church bodies have a publisher that cares very much about addressing a certain denomination. So it's kind of a cool blessing to have a publisher where we really want to make sure that we serve the LCMS as best as we can, and the rest of the world too, but making sure that what we do is faithful to the scriptures and the Lutheran confessions.
Absolutely. And so what is your role at Concordia Publishing House?
My role is a senior editor of curriculum resources, which is the editorial lead of all things curriculum right now. And that currently involves day school, confirmation, VBS, Sunday school, and anything that has to do with learning, specifically about age 18 and below, for the most part. So it's an exciting job, and there's always something new.
I almost said, that's it? Only 18 and below?
Yeah, we have a great team, and I've been doing this for, I think, about 3 years, if I haven't lost track. I've been with CPH for 10 or more years, depending on how you count, but in this role specifically for about 3.
So you're developing curriculum. How did being a teacher then help you in that process of now developing curriculum?
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention Nebraska, because Concordia, Nebraska was so great at teaching teachers how to create things, how to make lesson plans. As a Lutheran teacher, I took that for granted for a while. And I was particularly in secondary ed, so we always assumed we were going to make our own lesson plans and our own unit plans and things. And when I've seen other peers who were trained differently than from Lutheran education, they were learned how to use curriculum. And we were often taught how to make curriculum. And so I love that kind of training and how that's helped us, but it's also helped all the authors that we work with. Concordia grads in general have been taught to do that kind of thing. And we're always trying to keep students in mind. So I really miss the classroom, but I love the thought that I'm helping other teachers, and I often try to picture the students that I used to have whenever I'm writing things to help with that.
Absolutely. And as a pastor, I really appreciate having a teacher kind of at the helm of developing things, because I'm definitely trained differently. And I'm sure your husband would tell you, I don't know if he was trained in education beforehand, but I know for me, I did not go to school for education. So the education we did receive about teaching people, it was like drinking out of a fire hose. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's something we hear a lot. And in fact, our confirmation curriculum, the newest one, really try to keep that in mind, of trying to have the educational stuff kind of built in, so the pastors can do what they know best. You all know your content and everything, and how to relate to your people. So we just try to make sure that the activities had education built into all of that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think the challenge is just because you know a lot of stuff does not necessarily mean you naturally know how to communicate that stuff. And so trying to bridge that gap, that's one of the things CPH really helps us do. So we appreciate that. One of the things I kind of wanted to focus our time this morning is focusing on Vacation Bible School. So on our end, what we do is we either call you or we go to CPH's website and we say, hey, we want a VBS packet or box. And so we get this box in the mail. But before we can get this box in the mail, you guys have been doing all this work. So what all goes into developing a VBS curriculum?
Yeah, great question. So I actually am kind of regretting the fact that you see behind me is Rainforest Explorers, and that's because I took this one down off the shelf because I'm using it right now to look at the next thing I'm working on right now. So, for example, pretty much right now, some churches are starting to look at these boxes, the God Wonder Lab for this coming year, and so that's available now, which meant that pretty much a little bit more than a year or so ago, we were really getting actively involved in developing. Right now, I'm actively involved in developing the 2022 VBS. Sure. So the short-ish answer is we work on a VBS for about a year, give or take. Okay. But we think about it even before that. And that's something that we've actually kind of, I don't want to say changed up, but have been more intentional about. Sure. Where I'm thinking a lot about the next VBS, but I'm thinking some about the one before that, or the one after that, and a little bit about the one after that. Yeah. So we're trying to think in some ways 3 years down the road, but also giving full focus obviously to whatever's the next, but keeping in mind those other ones in terms of themes and such, so that we can think of, well, if I'm doing these lessons now, what kind of things might I want to do in the near future, and kind of help me make those decisions as well. Sure.
So, I mean, as you guys are brainstorming and thinking, I guess what leads you to a theme?
Yeah, we definitely want to do something that the kids would enjoy, that kids would wrap their heads around, but also really be able to use their imagination as well. That's kind of a tricky balance sometimes as to what kind of things are a little too abstract, or what kind of things would be fun for kids. Also things that would be fun for the volunteers, those decorators, they do all kinds of things, and we keep decorators in mind. So it's, well, if you have Rainforest Explorers, for example, a few years ago, we had this kind of item that maybe you could reuse, or this kind of idea that might be a little bit new. And so things that could be fun. Sure. But also we want to make sure that there's some sort of way that we can constantly bring it home, because God's word, of course, is front and center about everything. And so while VBS has all those fun kind of things and kind of create a world within your place, to make sure that there are ways to really bring home a point. So let's see, God's Wonder Lab, Jesus does the impossible. Yes, there's science, and science is good, and God made science, but things like miracles are defy science. And so we use Jesus' life as the lesson planning for the upcoming VBS. But we use kind of this idea of, look how cool God is by making science, and look how cool God is when he does things that are even more amazing, and miracles and things like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that. It's not, these are all things that we don't necessarily think about, but trying to create an environment that allows for some fun. So maybe not doing like a tax accountant's office or something like that would be a very good theme for VBS. But yeah, absolutely. What would you say is a challenging aspect of developing a VBS curriculum?
Well, one of the exciting but also challenging things about CPH is we're serving churches all over the nation, and all different kinds of churches as well. Sure. So we're serving churches that are in urban settings and rural settings. We're serving churches that bring in 500 kids and 10 kids. And so trying to find ways to serve those churches as best as we can, being flexible enough so that churches can make it their own, but also fulfilling the needs of each church. in some ways, it's kind of like a giant classroom. Different students have different needs, and different churches have different needs too. So that's one thought. The other one is just kind of the unexpected. Obviously, 2020 was unexpected for everybody. So last year, our main focus was, okay, how can we help churches who are trying to find ways to still reach out with to kids and families, even if VBS might look different from what it usually does. So that was something that I am really thankful for our whole team with. Our marketing team, Anna Johnson and a few others, really stepped up to the plate, trying to come up with some quick ways to help people with that unexpected. So that's not something I would have thought to say last year, but it's definitely what I've thought of recently.
Absolutely. And I, as a pastor, for those watching, Concordia Publishing House really did a fantastic job for families, for churches, for individuals, because you guys provided devotionals, you provided, how can you do like a virtual VBS? There was Bible studies available. You guys just went all out. So we really appreciate everything you guys did. Because that was a time where you really gave of your time and your resources for us when we were trying to figure out how do we do life. And I know you guys were trying to figure out how to do life. We definitely appreciate that.
Well, thanks. Glad to hear that was a help, because that was definitely our passion and our hope to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the website was perfect. It was so easy to use.
Yay! I'll pass it along.
So obviously there's challenges with anything, but obviously there's also joys that come with it too. As you develop a VBS, what's something that drives you? What's a joy that you experience from developing it?
I love seeing it happen. I've only been doing this VBSs themselves for a couple of years now, but I love to see, our churches use them. My kids enjoy them. People get super excited and hold up their craft or sing those songs. That's a lot of fun. I love to see how excited volunteers get. For our church, and I'm sure for all churches, VBS is a way for a lot of people to volunteer who aren't always able to volunteer in other ways at church. And so to see the joy just on the parents' faces and adults and volunteers that are able to share Jesus in a special way and have fun doing it.
Absolutely. And maybe the last question then is, so I know you've only been in this specific role for a few years, but you've been probably watching things unfold for a while. Mm-hmm. How would you say developing a VBS curriculum at CPH, has that changed at all over maybe like a 10-year period of time?
I would say so. I think there's different expectations. I think churches are seeing that families have different needs in the past. Their summers look different. Their family life looks different. So one of the things that we're hearing from churches is some churches do a weekend retreat VBS, or some do evenings, or some do, 5 Tuesdays in a row, or whatever that case may be. Some do all day VBSs. And so to try to be flexible, that's one thing. But also something that I am trying to be that much more aware of is VBS really is a way that a lot of families try to witness to their neighbors, where it's a little bit hard sometimes to say, hey, come to church necessarily, because for whatever reason, we're scared to do that sometimes. But it's a little bit more, I don't know, maybe it seems like families are more willing to say, hey, let's take you to VBS for a week. Join our friends for VBS with our kids. It'll be fun. So there are kids who know almost nothing about Jesus. And I know that I take that for granted. When I hear kids come to for example, Live Nativity at our church, and they'll point at this baby and say, who's that? That's something that I'm trying to keep in mind, so that on Monday, assuming that, sure, there's going to be some kids who know, have Bible verses memorized. And there are other kids who don't know who Jesus is. And so my goal is to help those kids feel welcome. And then by Friday, they know that Jesus is their Lord and Savior who died and rose for them. So that's one of the things that I've been more focused on for myself as I'm helping and work with the team in developing.
Absolutely. And that's super cool, because as Lutherans, I think one of the things that we can kind of pride ourselves in is education. And not only, with elementary and high schools and all this, but also in VBS and Sunday schools. But even now we're seeing that some of those things that we used to take for granted 10, 20, 30 years ago, you just can't take it for granted anymore. And I mean, it's part of it is a little like, but there's also some new opportunities that God is definitely giving us. And yeah, it's just time to keep on staying busy and everything with that stuff. So, Lisa, we really, really appreciate your time this morning and filling us in on something that we typically don't even think about. Like I said, we just get this box in the mail and we just kind of roll with it. But obviously, there's lots of stuff that goes in to develop a vacation Bible school. But really quick, that's the people who say good morning. Karen says good morning.
Hi, Karen.
Betty says prayer hands.
Oh, thank you, Betty, for the prayers.
Connie says good morning.
Hey, Connie.
Janet says thank you.
Aw, Janet, thanks.
And gives us a cross. And Annette's always very faithful about giving us a cross.
Love
and
it.
Then, Karen says again, thank you and interesting. So again, we really appreciate you kind of shedding some light on something that we typically don't think about.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that all said, next week we're actually going to be going to Florida and talking to a pregnancy center that helps women who are going to be having some babies. So we'll be going to Florida next weekend or next Monday. So again, Lisa, thank you for your time, and everybody else watching, the Lord be with you.